What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have another awesome Switch 2 update video today with multiple graphics updates and performance updates regarding Cyberpunk 2077, including a very likely discovery that the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077 is in fact being ported from the Xbox Series S version of the game. And we also have some information regarding how long CD Projekt Red has been working on Cyberpunk 2077. Was it really 7 weeks, or is there some confusion there? And some details on how much they are committed to this version on Switch 2 and how excited they are. I'm excited for this game as well. There's a lot of cool information to discuss here, and no doubt if you're looking to get Switch 2, you want to know everything possible about the graphics performance, because this thing is going to be running one of the most demanding games of the current generation, which is Cyberpunk 2077. Most people realize that if the Switch 2 can run this game at a decent performance, then it looks really good for this system to get pretty much every port that there is coming in the future. And that just means a lot more games to play and look forward to on this console going forward. So if you do enjoy this content, guys, please hit the like button and subscribe, and we will get started. So first up, the gameplay technical designer at CD Projekt Red for Cyberpunk 2077, his name is Philip Downar, told Eurogamer in an interview that they are thrilled about working with Nintendo. They said it's incredibly exciting to be a launch title for this new hardware regarding Cyberpunk 2077, alongside all the Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive features like motion controls, gyroscope implementation, the mouse sensor, and more. We can't wait to see how the community explores the game in new ways. And then he clarified about the development time for this game on Switch 2. He said, "Our team has been working passionately to make all this happen, and for more than 7 weeks, to be clear. This misunderstanding arose because the build we showcased was finalized 7 weeks before we showcased it at Nintendo. Development has been ongoing for much longer as we're working to bring Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition to Switch 2. Now, this is coming directly from CD Projekt Red and their technical designer, and it should be noted that the individual who was on hand at these playtest events, he was actually the global PR director at CD Projekt Red. His name is Radek Grabowski. He was the one actually talking directly to people playing Cyberpunk 2077 in person. So they would ask him questions about how long this build has been on development, or certain questions about the game. He would give them answers, and that's likely where the information may have been kind of distorted or confused a bit. In fact, YouTube channel GVG said it very clearly that this was a 7-week-old build that had only been in development for 7 weeks, and they had it up and running, and here it was. And you can listen to it for yourself. Here's exactly what they said. It's clear as day.
And I got to talk to someone from CDPR who let me know that the build we played, impressive as it was representative of only 7 weeks of work.
That's crazy.
They had been developing that port for only 7 weeks. Now, that's, to be clear, that's not to say that they've only been working on Cyberpunk for 7 weeks. But the build we played was at week 7 in the development timeline.
So it's possible, mistakes happen, communication kind of gets broken down along the way. It may have been misunderstood about how long this build was in development. Either way, CD Projekt Red did clarify this was a 7-week-old build before April 2nd. So that means early February 2025 was when that build was approved to be shown at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. There's about 4 months worth of optimization that CD Projekt Red can do on the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077, and Digital Foundry, we've been talking about them lately. We're going to continue talking about them in this video because there's some interesting things here going on with them. But they did a playtest at the London event, which likely was on April 10th, because press gets access 1 day before the public does. So likely it was on April 10th that they got to try out Cyberpunk 2077. And I noticed something very interesting though about their playtest is that they purposely were trying to get the game to basically slow down and have frame drops, because they were the only outlet that I noticed online that actually went outside of the play area that was set up for them in Dogtown, and they went and drove around the vehicles as fast as they could, and then alerted all the police. If you shoot the police, they'll call in everybody like a big army to try to kill you, and the game will continue to send the police just basically infinitely until you are dead or until you escape them. Because once you play this game, you'll know that if you just stand your ground against about 15 different police officers or 20 different police officers, you better get out of there really quick or your game's going to be over. And even Oliver from Digital Foundry said to Richard Ledbetter that he's never really seen that type of interaction with all the police and all those crazy amounts of enemies like he was showing there in their footage.
In Dogtown in particular, you're engaging in like this massive firefight with, I think, more enemies than I've seen in the base game for sure. So that's, it just seems brutal. I'm seeing like, you know, probably 12 little red dots, 15 red dots on the player HUD there. That seems like a pretty intense load. But yeah, in general, this is just like the worst of all stress tests, I think.
Making the game slow down on Switch 2 in its unfinished state. They were bringing out that the game was having these frame drops, and yeah, it was dropping below 30 frames, and probably like you would expect in an unfinished build with that type of interaction in Dogtown of all places. But when people were actually playing the game normally, it was running just fine. It was pretty much at a lock 30 frames per second, and some of the combat encounters they had were just fine, and the team has plenty of time to optimize the game to get it smoothed out. So this was a kind of interesting stress test that Digital Foundry did on Cyberpunk 2077 on Switch 2, and for some reason CD Projekt Red is being very quiet about confirming that they will be using DLSS or not for the Switch 2 version of this game. They haven't denied it, but they haven't confirmed it. There was some confusion about DLSS for this game as well from the showgoers who actually played the game. Some people got the impression that there was going to be DLSS, and they said so in their impressions, and some people just didn't say anything at all. So my guess is in the port of this game to Switch 2, they haven't yet implemented it yet, so they can't really confirm whether or not they're going to be using it to the public, because then DLSS will potentially give them that last push for performance that they may need to get frame rates to be locked and steady. Which also brings me to the next point, is that Digital Foundry is talking about the performance of the game dropping and everything like that, and the subject of the 40 frames per second VRR mode came up, and then they said this.
I honestly think maybe they should just concentrate on getting the 30 FPS quality mode right and performing well, as opposed to sort of like trying to produce a 40 FPS performance mode.
So I thought this was a very ill-advised comment here, because basically if a developer is shooting for 40 frames per second for a piece of hardware and a port, guess which frame rate is going to be taken care of along the way. If you're targeting 40 frames per second, 30 frames per second is also going to be handled as well. If you are actually going to be getting 40 frames, 30 frames is also going to be accomplished along with that. So it didn't really make any sense for them to say, hey, you just forget about the 40 frames per second mode pretty much and focus on getting a locked 30 frames per second. Digital Foundry does not have the dev kits to Switch 2. They are not the ones porting this game to Switch 2. It is CD Projekt Red that made that statement publicly multiple times that they are targeting 40 frames per second in VRR mode, in performance mode, and 30 frames per second quality mode. And those comments are coming from Digital Foundry after playing this old build of the game that still needs optimization and says in very big letters, work in progress, not representative of the final game. Just in general, I don't think anyone should actually be encouraging any developer to ever be shooting for a lower frame rate just because you're having some drops here and there. If their target is higher, yeah, go for it. Shoot for the moon. I say go for 60 frames per second. Do the best you possibly can do. I would never tell a developer, hey, you know, just forget about that 60 frames per second, forget about 40 frames per second, just go for 30 frames per second. That just sounds extremely silly to me, and it's almost like a defeatist attitude, basically like, oh, you know, you're never going to get 40 frames per second, you might as well just give up and just go for 30 frames. They really don't expect much from the Switch 2, it's very clear, we know that. So really I'm not surprised that they would say, hey, you know, just shoot for 30 frames, because of the past comments they made saying that this is basically a PS4, or pretty much it will never be more powerful than a Steam Deck. And I would hope actually that CD Projekt Red would actually continue to optimize the game after launch and then eventually add a 60 frames per second mode. And the reason why I say that is because the Xbox Series S version of Cyberpunk 2077 got a 60 frames per second mode 2 years after the release of the game on that console. And the reason was because they added FSR 2.1 at that time, which gave the Series S the ability to render at lower resolutions from 648p to 900p or so, and then upscale to an output of 1080p to get that 60 frames per second on that console. When the game originally released, there was no upscaling, and it had one mode, which is 30 frames per second, ranging between 1200p and 1440p, and that was it. And on top of that, before the next gen patches came a couple years later for Cyberpunk 2077, all the consoles were running this game in backwards compatibility mode, which was basically PS4 code and Xbox One code running on the new consoles. And the only thing they added, by the way, when they did do the next gen patch, was the FSR and ray trace shadows for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. But The Xbox Series S did not get any ray tracing features added whatsoever. It just got better frame rate with FSR 2.1. So that means even to this day, the Xbox Series S and the PS5 and Xbox Series X, when they're running in performance mode, especially all three consoles, they are not actually using any ray tracing at all. Basically the same settings that were being used on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One before the next gen patch came out. So it's also kind of silly to hear them say here that the Switch 2 version looks kind of like the PS4 version.
Especially in combination there, you're getting all those features. It looks, suitably last gen level. And that's actually pretty cool for, a Nintendo console to actually be at that level of visual fidelity. On the visual side, we're getting some nice looking graphics that are, in that PS4-ish ballpark.
It's basically saying it looks just like the Xbox Series S version of the game, because that's exactly what it is. It just runs at a better frame rate, and it has Phantom Liberty, the entire game, on the Xbox Series S, which PlayStation 4 and Xbox One did not. Which brings us to our next point. It looks like we have proof that the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk 2077 is in fact running the Xbox Series S code in this port, because Digital Foundry showed in their footage that when they went to the video options, they found the performance mode and quality mode, and it said in a little text box that it was targeting 60 frames per second 1080p in performance mode and 30 frames per second 1440p in quality mode, which is the exact settings from Xbox Series S. That's the only version of the game that says that in those options. So more than likely, it looks like CD Projekt Red is porting the code from the Xbox Series S version, which would make sense because the Xbox Series S is the closest thing to what the Nintendo Switch 2 is. And in the comparisons to other games, the Switch 2 does look closer to an Xbox Series S than it does to a PS4, regardless of what Digital Foundry has brought out. And we even showed in our last video that Elden Ring looks like it's running the high settings on PC on the Switch 2 versus the lower than low settings from PS4. So yeah, yet again we have confirmation pretty much that this Switch 2 is more performant than the PS4. I don't think anyone doubts that at this point. Very, very interesting stuff. But at least in my opinion, it does look like that they're going to hit their targets with this game on Switch 2. I'm not really worried about it myself, and they may even exceed those targets months down the line after launch, because they do like to continue to patch their games and update them, which may also mean they haven't had these dev kits for that long. Like we said, they haven't said how long they worked on the game. They said they worked on it much longer than 7 weeks, but we really don't know the exact time range that they've worked on this game with Switch 2. So we will just have to wait and see, but so far the performance does look promising for the Switch 2 version of this game, and I'm very excited to try this out on launch day on the Switch 2. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one. If you did enjoy this content, please hit the like button and subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.